Oh, sorry.
I got it. Yes, sir. Mayor Grotus.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Williams. Here. Councilor Hershey. Here. Councilor Talbot.
Here.
Councilor Davis.
Here.
Councilor Step.
Yes.
Councilor Wusso. We have a quorum.
Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Are there any agenda changes or conflicts this evening?
Does the agenda, Mr. Mayor, just include that one item?
It does.
Thank you.
Hearing none. There's citizens appearing before council. These are for items not on the agenda. And by items, I mean the one and only item. Yes, ma'am.
Could it be bigger?
Can you get an interpreter larger so you can see?
Yeah, they're gonna do that.
Don Gillespie.
Fine. Just in case you don't know, Don, how we work it is these are for items not on the agenda. I just didn't know if you knew.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Have you been here before?
Step to the podium. The podium.
Around the camera and up here. Right here. That's the camera that is zooming us.
Modern time. Don Gillespie, 3901 Mountain Drive. I just wanted to come up mainly like just for me to get some general information on what you guys are using as far as tools in your toolbox when it comes to traffic and water supply. In 2000, when we were trying to relocate 82, CDOT had us do 3 studies. And Shelley was in that 2-year period that we did those 3 studies. And one of the studies came up with the deal that if nothing was done on Grand Avenue, that by 2030 we'd be at red. And I think we're slowly, if not pretty close to that now. So I was wondering if you guys have updated that study, or you have a new study, or what are you using as far as the base traffic flow? And the second thing, I never did see any kind of studies on water supply based on historical flows. And we've been in a 10-year drought, and it looks predictions of maybe another 10 years. And I would think it'd be upon you guys to find out just exactly what the water is out there that you're going to have in the next 10 years. So have you all done a study on water at all? Carl's shaking his head yes.
Well, no, this is public comment, sorry.
Well, I mean, well, who's going to get back to me on it? Or?
Mr. Mayor, I can get back on the water issues to Don. I can't comment on traffic, but.
Sure.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Don.
Anybody else from public? All right, seeing none, we'll bring it back for council comments. Anybody have anything? Okay, I'll go. Just one, I think, to lead off the meeting, a couple of things, but one, just wanted to address briefly the tragedy that happened at Glenwood Adventure Park this past weekend. It's very fresh. There's a lot of things that we don't know, but I just want to say on behalf of this council and this community that our hearts and thoughts go out to the family and this child and the loved ones affected by this profound loss. This tragedy is felt deeply, and we hope that everyone is coping to find support and carrying the weight of heavy hearts and minds. There's no easy answers for this, and just as a community, we stand for this family that is dealing with this tragedy. Any other comments? I have one more thing that I'd like to say. Last Thursday at our meeting, we had an agenda item at the very end of the evening that kind of went off the rails. We had council conversation about an individual and a commission. And I'd like to read a statement on behalf of myself to Rob Gabriel. Rob, please allow me to deeply apologize on behalf of myself and the rest of City Council for the events that occurred last Thursday evening when you were publicly disparaged. This should have never occurred, as we value the volunteer board and the commissions that serve this council and the community. To single one member out in our discussion was wrong. At the time this agenda item came up, we had been in public work sessions and council meetings for nearly 8 hours. The meeting was controversial and exhausting, and we were not at our best. This is not an excuse, as we should have maintained our composure and professionalism. I would like to apologize to you. You are a partner of a respected law firm, a tireless volunteer of the schools, and been serving our Transportation Commission for over 3 years. As the mayor, I have a duty and responsibility to conduct a city meeting that is respectful and honoring of the public, city staff, and of each councilor. My inability to maintain decorum at the end of a long evening was embarrassing to me and hurtful to you. Please accept my apology and know that we will do better. Any other comments? Go ahead, Tony.
Just real quick, Happy New Year, Lashana Toba. It's the first night it was, or last night was the second. Thank you.
Thank you, Tony.
Thank you.
All right. Next item on the agenda is continuation of the annexation.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just to orient everybody as to where we're at, I know you guys have had a series of 4 meetings in 4 weeks. We left off with this. Public comment has been closed. You all had some questions. I imagine you have more questions this evening. So really where we're at in the process is questions to the applicant or to staff. And then really you're in a position to start working on a motion and where you're going with this. So with that, I turn it back over to you guys.
I have a question for you.
Oh, talking stick. Okay. There really is no tool when we don't use it.
The talking stick?
Yeah. It's like the video, you can't hear us.
Oh, good, that's good to know. So I just wanted to clarify, Mr. Hanlon, that there are actually 2 things this evening that need to be approved or disapproved or voted on. Action number 1 is the annexation, and then number 2 is the zoning, the initial zoning and rezoning of the property.
Absolutely. There's also companion ordinances that go with both of those things as well that just effectuate that.
That companion ordinance just puts those things into.
Yeah, absolutely. And just, again, in terms of how the process works with an annexation, talked about it a little bit the last time. Annexation is done via ordinance. State statute requires that you zone the property within 60 days after annexation, which is why you always see a companion zoning. In this instance, that zoning document is a PUD. That is zoning, not a site plan, as we discussed before. So that's kind of where we're at, and you're right, Councilor Hershey, that you have 2 actions in front of you tonight.
And then the third one, though.
Yeah, my question is, we raised some concerns and some suggestions to the developer at the end of the last meeting. Were there any changes made to the plans or the, I know the annexation agreement was revised, but the actual changes made to the plans? I think there's some ideas about more open space, things like that.
I think you would need to, I guess I would direct that towards the applicant. I would say the couple of things that we did try to address in the condition list from a staff perspective is a requirement that this parcel and rather the PUD parcel that is up, not the one that's already developed, but the undeveloped portion of this annexation, be planned, that the site plan be a master plan underneath the code, along with the West Glenwood Mall site. So that is in addition to the condition list. And also, it's kind of hard to put a finger on exactly what that is, but what sort of the takeaway from the conversation was that there would also be a meaningful public space created as part of that master plan. I think that's open to kind of how that would evolve. You know, there's a lot of different ideas on that public open space, what that might be. It could be anything, I imagine, from a town square to traditional, if you think about just, you know, grass. I don't know. And I think that's part of why it's tough when we're not in a site plan process and we're just doing zoning and annexation at this point. But those were the 2 big ones that I think for Trent and I came out of that meeting.
So as a follow-up, the only changes that have been made are the changes to the annexation agreement you set out this afternoon.
Yeah, they were into the condition list that Trent sent out, and I will let the applicant speak to any other changes to the site plan.
Real quick follow-up.
Do you want me to answer that question, or just?
Yes, that would be great. Just real quick, what is significant dedication? Meaningful, thank you.
I think that's kind of, like I said, I'm not sure exactly how to define that.
That would be the site plan, not the PUD approval. Thank you.
Please.
We have, ORME have not made a change to the site plan. I think what we did discuss with the staff was the idea of possibly adding some public space, particularly looking at a master plan, particularly where the site that we're talking about annexing and the mall redevelopment would occur, that we would be open to exploring that as part of an overall master plan. As you know, this is a zoning, not a planned approval, but we did talk about that.
Carl, can I ask you, please, too, can you explain a little bit the significance of the difference of a master plan process to what would have been before that, just for the PUD
Sure.
Major?
And actually, I may have Trent talk about it. We haven't actually done one underneath the new code yet.
Right.
The basic framework is that you do, for the entire property, it has to be a minimum number of acres and.
Minimum of 5 acres. So we thought that would just be the best process to pull both this parcel that is up for annexation today, along with the mall parcel that we anticipate some future redevelopment together into one kind of review process. But yes, it does require that it be a minimum of 5 acres to develop that. But it would be an overall kind of design approval at the city council level. And then if there were individual small proposals associated with that, it would be at the staff level.
Okay.
But the overarching land uses, densities, those type of kind of major points, open space, like we've mentioned, that would be, reviewed by both Planning and Zoning Commission and City Council.
Yeah,
Okay,
when we're talking
great.
about staff, it would be implementation of like a phasing.
All right.
That, like, a pad site would be, the next thing to go, and so that could go because it was part of that overall design.
Plan.
So in that way, we just felt that was the best way to address. We also have a on the West Glenwood Mall site, we have a 1970s vintage PUD that needs to be addressed. And this would give us kind of a modern overlay to everything to try to make it all work together and work as best as possible between those two sites.
Great. Okay. I think that would be a good plan. The other change, and maybe I missed it last week, was that item D in the annexation agreement, 7D, was that added, that they shown in the development to include access to Highway 6 through the parcel to the south?
Yes, that was added before the last meeting, but
Okay.
but that was at our first meeting. That was something that appeared to be very important to council, and so we were working through trying to anticipate what you would like to see.
Okay, so that was in there last time. I had seen it on the plan, but didn't catch it in here. Okay, that's all I have for now.
Thank you.
Carl, Trent, can you explain the timing of, now that we've looked at this master plan, including the Glenwood Springs Mall, does that kind of push us to considering the zoning part of this question tonight out to that 60 days to give us time to really see what they come back with, or how does that work?
Keeping in mind that master plan has to go back to the Planning Commission. It's a public hearing process. It's site planning, not zoning like the PUD is. And so, just our process internal to the city is at least 4 months from the date that hits as a complete application on Trent's desk to likely a hearing in front of you guys. So the 60-day window really doesn't have an impact on that. The zoning that you'd be approving tonight would just be really setting densities primarily and uses. And then that master site plan would really dig into how that all functions together, right? You've kind of seen one kind of version of that, if you will, in the PUD plan, but it's certainly possible that that would get tweaked as a result of the master planning process and that site planning process. What we've included in the annexation agreement, there again in anticipation of sort of how we would deal with this if you guys decide to move forward with it, is that within 6 months of execution of the annexation agreement, we need to have a master site plan, and there would need to have been an approval if you guys decide to approve it within 18 months.
And let me get this right when I say this, the densities that you just referred to on approving tonight, if we decided that we wanted less density, we would have to you would have to go back and renegotiate, we'd have to do that within 60 days?
Yeah, or you could just set the densities lower tonight. I mean, it's your document to decide where you want those at.
Okay.
If you know, I mean, that's part of like kind of in, as a general matter, if you feel that whatever the number is, the 300 plus is too many and you want 200 or 100, whatever number, that's within your purview tonight to make that determination.
And I'm just trying to weigh that within the fact that we could possibly have some park space, but that really hasn't been finalized, or open space and.
Right, no, and you know, there again, you're setting those densities tonight.
Okay.
And I know this is something we don't do that often because normally all of that is set by code. And so when you look at something this is a step that you haven't gone through as a council because it's already been adopted in the code. And so you can kind of think of it that way a little bit, as that this is the underlying code that then that master plan would be being responsive to.
Okay. And one other question that has popped up in my mind previously, and I've forgotten to ask it, is I have not seen comments from the school district in payment in lieu of space for potential school expansion, and we haven't done that for any other development, so I don't want to tie it to this one. Has there been a conversation with the school district in particular to this development?
Well, I mean, we always collect school, yeah, I was gonna say, we always collect school impact fees. And certainly they're a referral agency, so if they want something else, they will ask for it.
And those school impact fees go to them?
They go to them, yes.
What I'm concerned about is an increased population with increased children and the need for a space for schools when we have one middle school and.
Yeah, no, and that's, absolutely, and that's always a determination that the school district makes. And those, you know, historically, we have set those fees in lieu based on their recommendation, and we are simply a pass-through entity to them for those fees going to them.
Okay, thank you. No, I don't want to touch it.
Sorry, I made you touch it. Yep.
Carl, I did have another question on the parkland fees in lieu. Did that change if there's going to be significant, meaningful public open space?
Yeah, it depends on which parcel it's on.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, so it's always something we can, you know, this document can always be amended, and in my mind, some of those things we may need to come back to if there is a dedicated park space as opposed to simply a public space. Yeah, so I think that.
So is this flexible enough, though, as it's written right now, that we can?
Yeah, I mean, I think it would come back if there needed to be changes at the time of that application for the master site plan. We would take a look at amending the annexation agreement if necessary.
Okay.
You guys were willing to do it.
Okay.
Oh, question on Parkland.
And then, sure. And
On
then
the
I have-
Parkland, Carl, it says subject reductions for private recreation facilities. So they put in this community.
There are provisions, and I'll let Trent speak to that. There are provisions in the code for reductions, if you want to.
If they put a community center and pool in this proposal along Donegan Road, they would get a reduction in the Parkland dedication fee?
No, not for the private common open space that's included. That would just be for public facilities. So they don't anticipate, Charlie, with this proposal currently, to dedicate any of the pool, the community center, those things to the public. But if they did include future public facilities, that you can deduct that from parkland fees that are paid.
Top of page 3 seems to indicate that, the way I read it, for private recreation facilities to be constructed on the PUD project.
Mhm.
Which paragraph are you in, Charlie?
Top of page 3, paragraph 4C.
You're right, it should have been, that actually should have been a deletion that didn't get carried over. It should be for design and installation of the northern bike lane, for the design and installation of the southern bike lane, and wall when necessary, and any other basis approved underneath the code, so.
An old one?
Today. What he said this afternoon. Get the one he said. I'm looking at the actual ordinance.
This is probably,
Okay.
I'm looking at the.
Yeah, because there will be one more script, because this annexation agreement actually isn't going to be up until the next meeting. It's trying to reflect whatever if you guys were inclined to approve tonight, it would try to reflect everything that what your decision was in total.
Okay, so that will be, the annexation agreement will be for next time.
Yeah, the reason being is that as you guys, I don't like to try to change it on the fly. If you guys add conditions or change how you want to address things, if you do go there, it really provides the narrative to back up the decision that you make tonight if you were inclined to approve.
Okay. So on the deed restricted affordable housing, there's, and I'm looking at, possible motions, I think, but there's a line in there that talks about 20% residential units at 100% area median income, or 10% at 90.
Yeah, and that was kind of an either or for you guys to decide kind of where you wanted to be.
Okay, I would definitely push for the 20%. And is that then, and at 100% area median income, is that an average? So, the units can vary a little?
Yeah, that was kind of our thought on that, and we can add the word average in there.
Okay, does that sounds acceptable?
I mean, kind of where you run into that is that, typically, if you're trying to use that average, is, you might have some units at 120 and 100 and some units at 80.
Okay, right. So how would that apply when you have for sale units and rental units? Would that be equitably?
Well, so we're actually treating those two as two very different things. So that section applies to the apartment units. The second paragraph applies to the for sale.
Okay.
And then 10% of the for sale units would be deed restricted. One of the issues we have when we look at, and I think is Hannah in the room? Is Hannah did some rough calculations on kind of what build costs are right now and what, to get to 80 or 100% of AMI, the delta between the actual cost to construct and the actual sale price varies between $104,000 and almost $200,000 on each unit. So it's a big hit. And we contemplate in the annexation agreement entering into an affordable housing agreement with the developer if we go that route with possible city participation, although at this moment we don't have a funding stream for that, but one of the ways to help address that gap and what we have done what I've worked on in other communities is really working on trying to buy down that gap so that everybody is in partnership on getting those for sale units out there at 80, 100, 120%.
Right. So if there was a funding stream, we'd be able to.
Yeah, that definitely makes a difference. I mean, I've used an example in Silverthorne where that community has invested between land and buy downs in 200 units, close to somewhere between $15 and $18 million to get a fully affordable 200 units in town.
Okay,
The
thank you.
annexation agreement, again, you changed the word units and added apartments. Why was that change made?
You'd have to ask the applicant. They wanted, I think, to clarify that language, but I will leave it up to Haley.
Happy to clarify that.
Yeah, what does that mean?
The reason for that was just in case those for sale units are ultimately rented by a future owner. And to just distinguish those, that the 20% apartment units is for that residential apartment component, since we are treating those differently. So we just didn't want that, just to clarify that if somebody does end up buying one of the for sale units and wants to rent them, they won't necessarily be restricted to that AMI or into that cap of the 20% or the 10%, wherever that comes down, so just to,
It's include the units that are not going to be owner deed restricted.
correct, so the owner deed restricted units would be dealt with separately versus the rental apartments. So we just, that would help clarify, so that way if somebody that purchases the townhome wants to rent it down the road, obviously they have whatever restrictions are applicable to their unit, but they're not roped in with the rentals on the apartment side.
Purposes of this, a townhome would be considered an apartment.
No, they're the for sale unit, that's what we're trying to distinguish, is the for sale units are the townhomes, and then but somebody could buy a townhome and decide to rent it, and before it was just phrased as residential for rent units. So that was the purpose there.
No worries. And reading through all my notes, I came across that the 10% of the for sale houses, for sale townhomes would be deed restricted, but I also came across 8 of those units would be deed restricted. Where did we land on that?
Yeah, I think that we ended up at the 10%, not knowing, again, because this is not site planning. We're assuming that there could be 35 units, but it may be that the site plan only gives us 27 or something like that, and so we wanted to stick with the percentage of the total number built rather than a set number.
So 8 is no longer on the table.
8 is no longer on the table, but it was a percentage, and I guess if you want to, change that percentage, I think that's fine, depending on council's will. I do think a percentage is probably better, just not knowing exactly how many we're going to wind up with.
Other questions for staff or the applicant?
We asked all questions on the agreement and everything, I know.
Yeah, anything you want.
So,
Other than where the commas are at.
I'm not going to go there. In paragraph 10F of the agreement, we talk about the 5-foot sidewalk on Melray Road. Weren't there other improvements they were going to do in Melray? I thought they were going to do a reconstructed Melray.
Yeah, if you take a look at K in that same paragraph, no, sorry. It talks about if by the time June 1 rolls around, 2022, Garfield County can establish ownership so that we could take that in, we would, and then those improvements could be made. Otherwise, there would be a dedication of funds.
I understood that part of it, Carl. My question was, I don't see whether they're required to make Melray a fully functional road, which is.
We can't, because it's not a right-of-way. It's not owned by the county, so we can't annex it. So there's no way for us to do that because we don't have jurisdiction over it, nor can we get jurisdiction unless Garfield County clarifies title, and then we can annex it. That's why item K exists. Like there's literally nothing we can do about it.
Item K says we're going to hold out funds. Is that going to be just for the 5-foot sidewalk, or is that going to be for the?
No, it's for the total cost of equal to the engineer's estimate of cost of improvements to the road. So it would be for everything.
Okay.
The cops will speak up a little louder.
Oh, yeah, I apologize. No, thank you. I apologize. I'm thinking, so I have my head down. I apologize, and I thank you for bringing it to my attention. In the stuff about the fire station, I see that as long as it's under construction, we're okay with going forward.
Yeah, there was, and I'll let the applicant speak to why they requested that change. I had originally had substantially complete, but they suggested the change to under construction. I think, and just the goal being is that we're moving forward on it. It's not hypothetical.
Okay, because we're paying the cost of construction. They're just dedicating the land.
Yeah, they're just dedicating land. And,
right, that's
yeah.
The other question, I guess, is a more general question, Carl. It appears to me, the way I read this, that if for some reason the applicant doesn't go forward with the purchase of the mall, that this density would apply just to this parcel of property, correct?
Well, and the densities would apply to this parcel regardless, obviously. We might amend that during a master site plan.
If they buy the West Glenwood Mall
property. The difficulty is that we have had some challenges with the West Glenwood Mall site. And so Um,
And I understand that, but that's my concern because
Right, and I mean, there is always some risk, obviously. Recognizing they would still need to come back for a site plan process if the West Glenwood Mall site totally goes away for some reason. A couple of things to keep in mind. One, they do have an access easement through that property for the benefit of this parcel, so we can still get that access to Highway 6, which I think is critical. You also would still need to approve a site plan. It doesn't change the requirement that a site plan be approved, and that's another public process that they have to go through that you have to sign off on.
but if we approve these two pieces tonight, they get the density that they're proposing.
They do. They get then they have to, the other thing is that they still have to complete all of the improvements that we were asking for. They still have to dedicate the fire station site, and they still have to come up with a meaningful public open space. They still need to meet those requirements, even if we lose the West Glenwood Mall site.
I'll make sure I understand.
Yeah, which obviously is going to have a material impact on the size of this project.
Other questions? Okay, I will be looking for a motion or general comments. Maybe a motion might not
Do you
be,
want a motion first or general comment?
I think a motion would be great.
Okay.
But if I don't get one, I'll just take general comments until a motion.
I'm going to make a motion to deny the application on the basis that the annexation does not minimize potential adverse impacts to the city and does negatively impact on the city's public health, safety, and welfare.
You couldn't hear what the motion was.
Yeah, the motion was to deny the annexation. Do I speak loud enough?
Please,
No, we could not hear it.
well, we can hear you clapping, so.
I apologize for not speaking up again. Not usually a problem I have.
Okay, anyway, bring it back to council. There is a motion on the table. Tony, comments?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor, I think you saw that during the public comment that went over several days, I wrote down, and if someone can't hear me, raise your hand. I wrote down every single person who commented and what they said. And, you know, people say to me in the street, and my mother even said this to me, well, if everyone's against this, how can you be for it? And I'm reminded of a quote from Edmund Burke. He was a member of parliament during the American Revolution. He was actually very supportive of the colonists, which was not a particularly popular position with the king. But he said, your representative owes you not his industry only, but his judgment, and he betrays instead of serving you if he sacrifices it to your opinion. Saying that while we certainly have a representative democracy, we don't have a pure democracy, and it's our job at this table to sometimes make tough decisions, whatever way the public wind is blowing. My problem with this project, and why I think I'm leaning towards supporting Mr. Willman's motion, is that I'm not sure. And if I'm not sure, I'm going to defer to what the people are saying. And we've had a lot of comment, and some of it has been for this project. And the applicant has done an excellent job. But I think members of council and people, the public particularly, but certainly in the newspaper never, have heard my concerns. And my number one concern, and it's been echoed, is water, and it's also water. We have a limited amount of water, and I sent an article to the members of this council about communities in Utah stopping all growth. They're like, we're done. We cannot grow anymore because we do not have enough water. I look at a place like Las Vegas, and I just don't know how they can just continue to grow. And they've actually stopped. And I think the mayor said they're paying people up to pull up grass because they can't support it. How much more growth can we support? Secondly, infrastructure. Until this council makes a commitment to fix our streets and the water system and the electrical system, I can't support bringing in more people. It's not fair to the people who live here, and it's not fair to my third thing, the traffic. Traffic is out of control in this community. If we get more cars, and if you build 400 units, if you build 500 units, I heard this argument in Aspen a lot. Well, they'll all take the bus. Don't worry, Tony. We're not going to give them any parking, and that way they'll have no cars, which seemed to me like if we don't build a hospital, nobody will get sick. It doesn't work. We have to, people have cars. And they're going to drive their cars, and they have every right to drive their cars wherever they want. This is America. So I just think that the amount of growth that we would see from a project like this is not appropriate. And this goes to my final point, which is sort of the fire, open space, schools, and these other ancillary issues that we've discussed, the impact and the police. I saw a police officer here. We are short 10 policemen. How many more policemen do we know if we add 500 people, if we add 300 people? Because of my job, I can tell you that, you know, if you have more people here, you're going to have, unfortunately, more crime. And not just more crime, you're going to have more people to police. And we just don't have them. And it's not fair. I think this is an admirable idea. My concern is we already have pockets, and I was talking to some citizens the other day about this. We have areas where there's going to be growth. You can go to Walmart and there's the Rippey property, the Rivers Restaurant. There are places we're going to build units, and there is going to be growth by right. Why are we as a city, or why is this council saying, well, we're going to have all that growth and this? And I understand the argument for affordable housing, and there's no teachers and there's no policemen. I just don't think you can build your way out of this. And because of the reasons that Charlie or Mr. Willman stated in his motion, excuse me, I'm going to support that motion. Thank you.
Wait,
Oh, I'm sorry.
can I ask a truly sincere question, though, of you in that position? I mean this with all sincerity. How come you voted for the last development of 35 units last week, but not? I mean, can you just tell me the difference? And I'm being that sincerely.
And I think I said why, although I don't know that I have to say why. What we approved is within the city limits, and they have a certain, by right, that seems like an appropriate location for that type of density. This does not. But people with your blue bandanas should not be mistaken that, like, let me tell you a quick story. I was on the Aspen City Council, and a woman who has lived in Aspen for generations, and you would know her last name if I told you because she's famous, lived across the street from an empty lot by Shadow Mountain. And it had been, since I was a little kid, it had been an empty lot, and it had been an empty lot since the 40s. And they were going to build a hotel apartment building there. And she said, you can't do that. That's always been an empty lot. And I said to her, you should have bought it in 1953, and you didn't. And so this lot that is owned by the Demoses is going to be something like this. It's going to be commercial. It's going to be by right in the county houses. But to answer your question, Mr. Mayor, I don't want that type of growth in that location. I understand what's going on at the Meadows, but that seems like an appropriate place. So if my votes are incongruent, then I guess they are.
No, thank you. That helps me. Thanks,
I just want to comment on the motion. First of all, I want to thank the developer.
You have to speak up.
Sorry.
No, out to there.
I thought this was going out there. All right, I apologize. Okay, that's probably why I was not
for
doing
the video.
Yeah, all right. So, first of all, I want to thank the developer. I think it's a really good concept. It's just too much in the little space. What I would love to see is a development that includes both the mall property and this property, and that's what's troubling me. I think this amount of density might be appropriate if we included the mall property in there and looked at a more comprehensive redevelopment of not only this property, but the mall property. And it's tough because I know you didn't have that under contract when you started this process. And I don't know where you can go with that. And it's easy for me to say something, but I just think it's too much for a 12-acre parcel, 14-acre parcel, sorry, for the parcel of the size. I think it's too many units for that size. That was spread out over the entire property. It would be more appropriate in my view. I also think there's a need for park space, public park space out there. And what I see in the proposed annexation agreement is we're going to talk about that in the future, and I don't like talking about that in the future. I want to know that there's going to be some park space because I think there's going to be a lot of young people, a lot of children in that area. I think it's important that we provide them park space. I agree with Mr. Hershey that for the people in the audience, I listened to everything you said, and just because a large percentage of the people who spoke here spoke against it, had an impact on my decision, but did not cause me to decide the way I wanted. I agree with Mr. Hershey. This property is going to get developed in some fashion, and I think that the owner of the property has a right to do that. I just wish that we had a little more time and a little more ability to make this an overall project so we could have a overall development that would include retail, commercial, and housing that is reasonable and appropriate to that area and density of that area. It's a lot of people. Almost, if some of the numbers I heard, it's almost 10% increase in our population in a very small geographic area. I think infill is important, but this is too much for this area.
Who's next?
Well, we can touch it.
Thank you. I guess first and foremost, I want to applaud our community, both the demos and the developers, for coming up with ideas, and also the West Glenwood community for identifying challenges for this project. A little background for me, because so many of you stood up and said, I've lived in West Glenwood 30 years, I've lived in West Glenwood 15 years. My grandparents, actually, my great uncle and my grandfather actually platted and developed the Western Hills subdivision. And so my grandparents built a house at the top of Soccer Field Road about the same time that Mr. Demos purchased that property. So ultimately, I grew up at my grandparents' house seeing development after development in West Glenwood. Cedar Crest and Sunset Ridge and, you know, and on, Orchard. I mean, all the townhomes that have come in that have allowed us as a community to grow. And growth, I think, is so important to allowing, when I was a kid, there was like 2 places to buy a pair of shoes. And now that you have some options, better restaurants, you know, but finding that balance in growth is what I think we all strive for. So often, the comp plan was referenced and said, you know, we couldn't make a decision until this comp plan had been established, this new comp plan. Truthfully, I read through, I mean, so many of you referenced it that I thought, I really, you know, I had known it familiar with when I was on planning and zoning, but I thought, I need to read through this again. Well, yes, your arguments for, you know, what you took out of the comp plan is important, resonated, and will continue to resonate probably in the next one. But so too did affordable housing, which no one referenced. Affordable housing is in that comp plan. And this allows affordable housing. If we get enough supply, we will have the housing we need, and it will come down to an affordable price. I second Charlie's motion for 2 reasons. One is because I think the way we do it up here is that we have to have a motion on the table before we can have this discussion, but also because I have looked at the density on this project, and although there is a lot of density, West Glenwood, we live in a community filled with a lot of condos and townhomes, more than I think any other area of town. But I think on this property, the density, just cumulatively across the parcel, was a little too big for me to feel comfortable with. So my thoughts are not that this is, you know, I'm not quite where Tony is saying we don't need to build it, but saying maybe there's a middle ground, maybe there's a reduction in density, maybe it can be spread across both this parcel and the mall parcel. And until I see something that resonates with that, I can't comfortably move forward. I will say that water is important to me. It is important, but this type of housing uses a lot less water than if we were to plat this subdivision for single-family homes all across it. You know, with no yards, you know, just generally speaking, we have data that supports this. Condos use significantly less. So if we are going to have that type of housing for elder care, for people who want to, you know, age in place in their homes, we can integrate this idea into this project. But I don't think that water is one of the arguments. I think it's important. I speak about water all the time. But for me, this is just general density. This is just people in motion in that area. And for me, this project is too dense.
I have a question of you.
Absolutely.
What feels
Can we do it again? Okay. So for me, and granted, I'm probably biased because I am in real estate, I believe that so many people in our community who can afford these crazy high rents, they really want to own a home. They want the same luxury that so many in the audience and the majority of us have had, and that is they want to buy a home. So I want to see more for sale units. I want to see lower density with more for sale units. So to quantify that, I'd like to see like a 25 to 30% reduction. And I'd like to see that area, you know, if they want to offset it with more for sale units, that's what I want to see. Mm-hmm.
It's your turn.
My turn? Yeah. When everyone's done, can I just respond to what you've done?
Yeah, well, if you want to respond very quickly.
Very quickly, I don't know how I got the reputation for being like Mr. Anti-Growth. I am not anti-growth. I am for growth, manage growth in the right place. And I've said this before, I don't want to live in Highlands Ranch. I can move there if I want to, but I don't want to live there. This community is unique because of the way it is. And if we just have this explosive growth, 6 houses use a lot less resources, than 400 condos. Thank you.
Just selected for going next.
You are selected.
Got it.
You're bestowed with a talking stick.
Yeah, give me a minute here. I'm still.
And I'm just going to read a few things because, as you know, we've been considering this for a long time. We have heard a lot of really good public comment from people who live over in West Glenwood and also from others across town who are looking for housing. And I guess that's where I'm coming from. I appreciate the comments that Councilor Hershey made just about us being here as leaders and needing to make decisions for the best of the overall community. And when I go online and do a search for apartments or housing, even for sale in Glenwood Springs, there's almost nothing out there. Six Canyons appears to be full. The Loft, I believe, last time I looked, had 1 unit available. And I know they have others coming online, but 1 apartment available. These units are very high priced. A lot of what we've been seeing being built in the community are small apartments. They're getting smaller, yet the price isn't coming down, the price is going up. And there's almost nothing available that's affordable housing. So the area in West Glenwood needs a grocery store. I've heard that. You guys need a grocery store. People want a movie theater back. You know, that means in order to do that, we need to get them all redeveloped. We did a study a couple of years ago that, put them all in an urban renewable authority because it's a blighted area. You know, it's not developed, it's not thriving right now. It's an empty mall that's sitting, waiting for some renewed life to come to it. So I look at this development as a way to get that done and to bring vitality back to that area. The pedestrian and bicycle improvements on the roadways out there in West Glenwood are sorely needed. There are people walking, in the shoulders on the road, and there's a good amount of traffic out there. So what are most smart growth practices? To me, smart growth is growing and staying within our urban boundary. And yes, this is an annexation. It's not currently in the city, but it's within our urban boundary. A lot of those neighborhoods that are out there in West Glenwood you're part of the city, basically. Maybe not technically, you're still in the county, but you're Glenwood Springs, right? You're part of the city. So this is, in my example, I look at this lot, this is a perfect infill project. This is a project that's within our urban development area of Glenwood Springs. When I look at limiting our impacts as a city on our surrounding area and the climate, we have it in our strategic plan to be environmentally responsible and to work on things like smart growth. We have the city as 100% renewable electricity. We're Tree City USA. We've got a wonderful tree canopy within the city, and we want to protect that. We're protecting our rivers and riparian zones, but we want to keep our community walkable, and we want the growth to be, in order to be smart growth, we don't want to grow up. We don't want to grow up Mitchell Creek. We don't need a lot more growth up 4 Mile, where people have to try to evacuate in the event of a fire. If we can grow densely, more inward and upward, that's what our comp plan calls for, is more of a smart growth, so that people can live closer to their jobs and work, hopefully ride transit or bicycle to work. And that's what we hear from a lot of the young people that want to live and stay in Glenwood Springs and raise their families here. We have over 2,500 people who travel from other parts of the county to come and work in Glenwood Springs. If we can attempt to house more of our workers here, that is real progress in trying to reduce our traffic and reduce the impacts on the families that have to commute and on the resources that are needed. I heard a lot of talk about small town character, but I think there was one person who made a comment, and I can't remember which meeting exactly it was, but they said, you know, our true asset in Glenwood Springs is our neighbors and our workers. And I could not agree more with that. And I believe that was a comment to say against this project, but I would turn that around and say that also applies to new neighbors and new workers that we can bring to work in Glenwood Springs. From our comprehensive plan, we're looking for diverse housing, diverse population for seniors, workers, students, all income groups. Specifically, it calls out our secondary centers as the Glenwood Mall and the lot to the north to be developed with significant housing, medium to high density, 4 to 5 stories with mixed use appropriate in a compact urban form. That is straight out of the comp plan. So again, you know, I love having this community conversation, and all of the comments are very important. I believe this developer is being very responsible in responding to those comments. We have the city now actively working on evacuation plans for safety and coming up with new ideas, out-of-the-box ideas, and we have a developer who's willing and able to help us get those built and accomplished. We have a developer who's willing to help us locate and get a new fire station in West Glenwood Springs, which is sorely needed. So I believe this developer is working in good faith to give a lot to the community as a whole. Maybe it's a little denser than I would prefer, but you struggle with that because, again, density can be smart, and it can also be much more livable for people, especially when we're so geographically constricted as we are in Glenwood Springs with our steep canyon walls. And we don't want to, none of us want to see growth going up the sides of our canyons and into our view plains. So keeping it on the valley floor is actually smarter. And I have to say, I would hope nobody could support this. This is a sea of concrete and commercial buildings. So to me, this would be the absolute worst decision we could make as a community. So that's all I can come up with right now, but I'm going to vote against this motion. I'm hoping we can keep this moving forward, get the annexation in place, and work with this developer who's willing to give us, you know, to work with us as a city. We've had other growth going on in towns where the developers have not shown nearly as much interest in the welfare of our community as a whole. And I am loath to turn away an owner and developer who does have interest in the good long-term future of our community. So with that, I have a question, Carl. If this motion passes, Where does that leave us? Can we,
It means that you've denied the annexation. Presumably there will be a companion, motion to deny the zoning, because obviously it doesn't have a purpose. And beyond that, that's all I've got, because the rest of it is going to be up to, the owners of the properties, both the West Glenwood Mall and the demoses of the PUD property, as well as folks that have it under contract. And so I don't think I can speak to that, and frankly, I don't think it's fair to ask them what's next if this motion passes either, because I don't imagine that they have a clear idea yet.
is there room in our process to have any further negotiation on the?
But it would require underneath our process to have a substantially different application come back, or there would be a waiting period, 6 months, where the application could return. So I can't tell you what that world would look like.
Thank you.
Paul, are you ready?
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mayor.
You don't have to go.
No, I've got things to say.
Go next.
I've got things to say. Well, Steve always waits the last. For you. I think we are going to see growth and change throughout this whole town. It's a given. That's what happens in life, and unless we hit a bust of somehow, we're definitely going to see that happening to us. The developer and the city staff worked really hard to find mutual ground to accommodate the city's needs and the developer's needs. But that being said, I think I'm going to vote for this motion because there are a number of things that I am concerned about. And I think part of it is time. There are things that we still need to work through. And even though we've been told that this is just the PUD and the annexation, I feel like the PUD revolves around some of the questions that we need to work through. And even if it's 6 months' time that was just referred to, or it takes a year, I think there are things that we can still work through and accommodate. For me, on the Housing Commission, I speak to affordable housing many times and have had many conversations. But for me, affordable housing is a variety of housing, and housing for sale, and housing people can make their homes. And when I see developments of this size, I'd like to see that variety of housing. That's what's in our planning and zoning is, you have a large development, and it's not just apartments. And I have to applaud this developer for adding the townhomes, but on 12 acres of land, less the fire station acreage, and depending on what we would get with open space, I would expect to see duplexes, townhomes, condominiums, apartments, a good variety that people have an opportunity to invest in. This is their future, this is our town's future. And when we speak to traffic, and this would mitigate traffic by having affordable housing, it would mitigate traffic if people can buy here. They can't buy here. They go to Newcastle, Silt, Rifles to buy property, and then they still commute in. So we have to find a way to solve that problem rather than just finding more rental units, even though they are deed restricted or restricted in some capacity to provide some affordable housing. And I do appreciate the developers offering that. The other thing that I have to say is I think the sort of Damocles that hangs over our head here is the fact that we don't know when the next event is going to happen, and we are not truly prepared for that yet. And we really do need to prepare as a town for the next time we need to evacuate, we need to close off one section of town. And I think we've addressed that well in South Glenwood, but I think we have the same problem in West Glenwood, and we really need to, I believe the city is working on a good plan, but I think we need to lay it out to the community and say, this is what we're working on, and we have all these stakeholders involved in it, and we need to address it now and before a development is put in place. We need to know what's going to happen when something happens. There are a number of other things that I think we could work towards. One, you had asked, Mayor, you had asked Ingrid, what is better for the density? For me, density would be, again, that 25 to 30% drop in what we're looking on that 12 acres, and having more affordable units within there. I am concerned
on annexing a property, even with the great strides we've made in asking for a fire station and possibly looking at some open space. But I am concerned that we need to look at our future of how to take care of this infrastructure we are going to pull into our town. How do we take care of the police and the fire people that we're going to need there? How do we take care of streets and underlying infrastructure? How do we take care of water? Those are answers that have to be taken into consideration as far as the money that we need to do that, not just 2 years out, not 5 years out, but 20 years out, because this property will be there 20 years out from now. We need to make sure that we're able to sustain what we need here in town for that kind of development. I don't want to shut this door. As I said at the beginning, growth is going to happen. This property is going to change. I just want a plan that looks at some of these things that concern me. And I believe even with the number of, large amount of feedback we got, I think on the whole, people realize this is not going to be a horse pasture. And there are opportunities there, and there are probably opportunities with this developer if we could find ways to accommodate some of the things that we need looking at the future of Glenwood.
Shall I ask you the same question I asked Tony? I think it's fair. You voted against the last development, but you seem to be in favor of this one. Can you tell me what some of those differences were? I'd put you on the spot.
Yes.
So we're having a general community conversation on growth. I think it's important for the community to understand this.
Did vote against the last one, even though it was much smaller. It was dense. It was another phase, for anyone who doesn't know, it was another phase of units in the loft development. It was kind of a repeat of what we've seen out there. I think they're up to 300, and that would push them up to 309 units. But it's all been the same units. And in my mind, I voted against that because there was no offering to the community to have affordability in those units. Some of the units they're relatively small. And to me, that does not comply with our comprehensive plan. As I talked about earlier, our comprehensive plan calls for diversity of housing mixed all through the community, and for livability and housing that meets the needs of our community. What we've seen in that last development is one product brought to the community. And I think that puts a strain on us, puts a strain on our resources. You know, when we talk about how are we going to, if I can speak for another couple minutes, how are we going to deal with having a police force that serves our community, and firefighters, and plumbers, and waiters, and engineers, and anybody else, teachers? If we don't have housing for them, we don't have community. You know, right now we have businesses out there. We have a school district that's saying they cannot hire and keep teachers. We have a hospital who cannot hire and keep nursing staff and other staff that need to serve the patients. You know, we have police and firefighters that have to commute long distances. That's a strain on families. It's a strain on lifestyle. And so to me, it's a question about what kind of a community do we want to be? And more housing for our workforce and our families is about community. It's about livability, small town character. And so that's why I can support this one and not. And I would like to see if I can make a motion. I'm not sure how this works.
You already have a motion on the table.
Can I make a motion to
An
table that motion, an alternative motion?
You could make a motion to modify it, but you can't change the core of the motion. You're going to make a motion to continue the item and, tabling, recognizing tabling is continuing indefinitely to no certain date.
Did you? Yeah. Table to a time certain.
Yeah.
Wondering if we continue this I would like to make a motion to continue this so that this developer does not have to go back to square one and start all over. We've made so much progress and had so much community input so that council can possibly work with the developer to keep this process going.
Point of order, continue or to table?
It is a difference, because the table means you lay it on the table indefinitely. The motion would be to continue to a date certain.
Okay.
So that would be the alternative main motion that you guys could vote on.
I would be,
I would say just one other thing is that I misspoke. It is a year before they can bring this project back.
If it's denied.
If it's denied, yeah.
I would make a motion to continue this project until our, first meeting in October. This annexation consideration.
Before we do that, and I'm sorry to interject, but is it possible that we can ask the developer if anywhere, what's their sense of?
Yeah, I would say, can I just request a 5-minute recess and let me have that conversation? Perfect. That would be great. Yes.
Thank you. I will second the motion, just so we have a clean second for when we come back. Take a 5-minute break. We'll be back here at 7:13. Not like that, Sean. Good call. Good call. We have a motion, I believe, and a second by myself, to continue this, agenda item to the first regular meeting in October. There's some discussion about tabling, continuing, but I think the intent is we take a vote on this motion first, and we readdress it in the October meeting, given the developer this is the first time the developer has heard, just for the public, some of our comments so that they can recalibrate and bring something back that might be responsive to these comments. Go ahead.
So I think the one thing that I do want to add is that, I think if you're willing to, and I think this goes to your decision on the motion to continue for each one of you, is if you are willing to engage in some give and take on what that is. I mean, this isn't an add plus conversation. I mean, we talked a little bit about, and you guys know this because you award contracts every day. There are costs associated with all of this. And so if it is an add plus to what's already on the table, then I don't know that there's a lot of room to talk. If it is a conversation about some give and take on what's already here, and that is more, me going back and having a conversation about kind of repackaging with some of what you guys have described tonight, then I think that's worthwhile. But you have to recognize that, and I will tell you this just from my standpoint, as you guys know, I was a longtime developer attorney. There's only so much in any project. So it's a recognition that an annexation is a give and take. And if you guys are comfortable with that, and those that are on the negative side on the motion to deny, feel like there's still some give and take, and not just, depending on which side you're on, a give or a take, then I think it's worthwhile. But if it's not, then I think it's probably not worthwhile continuing it.
I'm probably having definition what add plus is.
So I think what it is that every project has, so much that it can give. And so a 20 or 30% reduction is a significant hit to income, which means that there are other things which may need to give in that, whether it's public improvements, whether it's fire station, whatever that might be on the table. But that's something that I don't know, and I don't think the developer fully knows until we'd engage in that give and take as to where it's at. But just recognizing that 200 units is a very different project than 300 units in terms of the profitability and in terms of, everything. It changes the entire project. So, we really kind of go back to square one. If that's the main direction of council, is density needs to be reduced 20 to 30% or 25 to 30%, I need to go back to square one in a negotiation posture about the give and take.
Is it appropriate for you to talk?
That'd be great.
Yeah, reach all the way.
As the developer now would have an additional bit of time to look into this, is it appropriate to ask for not necessarily a master plan, because that is very comprehensive, but some idea of how they might use small property at the same time, or should we just keep it clean and say 480 Donegan is what we're talking about?
I mean, I would be more inclined to say that the decision you're making is on 480 Donegan. I think tying it to the master plan. Oh, I'm sorry. I think it's, ultimately you have to make a decision on 480 Donegan. And to the maximum extent we can, we've tried to tie the two together now. I think the danger in sketch plans are that oftentimes they don't have anything to do with engineering in reality. And so I would be hesitant for you guys to be making a decision in October based on a napkin, which is kind of the level that we'd have to be at. I mean, you've been there on the planning commission, so you know that is just a really tough place to be to make a decision.
Sure. And is there anything that is there any additional feedback that we can give the applicant and the developer? Like, are there any conditions that we should be reviewing now or anything along those lines? Or should we just say everything is up in the air?
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say, if everything is back on the table, I think then that's a conversation and we can start looking at everything again. And that's what I was saying to Paula's question on what is an add plus. Everything that's in there now in terms of, public improvements, affordable housing, fire station site, public park, space, all of that needs to go back in the hopper and figure out what can come out if the most important thing to council is the density reduction.
And is that fair to you guys? Can you know, all confirm that those who are wavering, not quite where Tony is density the biggest concern?
I have other concerns.
Okay.
And I was hoping to address this as we look at whether or not to continue it. I mean, I spoke to what was big to me, but I think there are other things that we still haven't addressed, and I'll just go through them. One, I do feel like this is going to make an impact. An increased population is going to make an impact. Thank you. It's going to make an impact on what schools are needed out there and what our school system is going to need, and they really need to be part of this conversation. If we've gone from 3,100 population in West Glenwood, and now we're adding another 800 to 1,000 people. How does that affect the number of teachers we have out there, the space for schools, that type of thing? I'd love to have their input on this conversation. The other thing that I'm worried about is the traffic impact on Highway 6. We spoke to this development, but no matter how you put it, we have approved a number of developments from the Loft to Six Canyon to a number of other things going on 6 and 24, and then we're going to add this one to it. How do we take care of that traffic on Highway 6? When we get to roundabouts, when we get to 5 o'clock traffic, trying to leave town, when we get to a point where there's an accident on the highway, when we get to the bigger problem. So that really concerns me, as we have not addressed the traffic issue enough. And the other thing that I'm concerned about is this complete change from, that transition. And I really appreciate the fact that we're going to have at least a row of townhomes dividing it, but then we go to 3- and 4-story buildings that aren't within our typical planning, and it's a different look for that area. And that really does tie into what we end up doing with that mall property. We need to know. I mean, we're basically crossing our fingers and hoping that however that development goes on the mall, it's going to fit well with whatever this one is in front of it, and also fits into the neighborhood. So I feel like there's some unanswered questions that I'm not sure we can take care of in 3 weeks. And I definitely don't want to delay a conversation just to come back to this same point again, of there are bigger pictures that we need to address. And I really don't see how some of this can be resolved in that short of a time. So that's my concern.
Is there an amount of time that you think they can be resolved? That would be more reasonable, Paul.
As I said earlier, I do feel like the developers are trying to work with us. These bigger picture problems are maybe the idea of the impact of 6 and 24 traffic and how do we resolve that. To tell you the truth, I don't have the background to know how we take care of that first before we take care of a development that has this number of units on it. So, an answer to that, is that 6 months? Maybe that's what I was looking at previously when Carl mentioned 6 months. Is that like, okay, well, that gives us some time to see what's going on. And that seems like a long time for the developers. So I'm just trying to be honest about how I feel about some of these problems that we're facing with this development.
You want to talk?
Mr. Hanlon, I will,
Louder.
Mr. Hanlon, I will concede that a motion table may not be appropriate. It is, and what it should be, because I read Parliament rules during the break, is it should be a motion to continue consideration of my motion, which is what I assume are considered.
Right.
Motion.
Yeah, because at the next meeting,
Motion table is
you have to take up the motion.
motion, the underlying motion. So
Right.
that was my only comment, and I'm going to support continuing consideration of my motion.
Don't do anything?
This will be resolved, correct, at some point? Thank you. Again, Ingrid, I keep getting singled out that I'm like against all growth. I am not. In fact, I like a lot of part of these projects, but I can also count to 4. And I think continuing this, I'm not going to support this. We need to vote on this and make a decision. These people have come to multiple meetings. Their lives are up in the air and their futures are up in the air. And we may need to make this decision tonight. Thank you.
And to some of your questions, Carl, about density and that kind of thing, in my mind, if we can continue this tonight, we've come this far. We've had a lot of public comment, a lot of discussion about it. And I believe we continue that negotiation a month from now, and let's see where we land. I am not as adamant that density needs to be reduced by a certain number. You know, I don't know what the sweet spot is, but maybe we can hear that from the developer, you know, how we can negotiate around that. So that's where I am. I'd like to see us give this a little more time.
Yeah, I'm not set on a percentage of reduction, percentage reduction. I think that's, you know, I think it'll be interesting because I think the community wants a new fire station. I think the community wants an evacuation plan. I think the community wants a grocery store. So I think there's a lot of things that if we kill this, we lose all of that, and we're back at square one. And I would challenge anybody to find an acre of ground where we're going to build a fire station right now today, outside of this proposal that's in front of us. It can happen. I mean, we can condemn some properties probably and figure out how to do that. Carl loves when I talk that way, so. I think that, you know, to Paula's comments about the school district, Two Rivers School District is right there in that neighborhood and is 70% RE2 students. So I think what would happen potentially is they would probably say to the kids in Silton, Newcastle, you can't come to this school and we have to serve the students in Glenwood Springs. We haven't done that. The school district has not done that so far. But I think if there's a population that at some point when the school district says we have enough of our own students that we can't serve them, then they will stop enrolling students from outside the district. But so far, there haven't been any caps on that, as far as I'm aware of. But it would be good to hear from the school district to verify that that is the case. I will support the continuation of this because I'm very curious to hear the developer come back and say what kind of sacrifices that will need to be made if that does happen. I think that understand though, a 30% reduction, one of the costs outside of potentially a fire station, street improvements, bike lanes, parkland dedication, because right now there is no parkland at all out there. It's a privately owned pasture that you shouldn't trespass on. So there's zero right now. So if this fails, there's still 0% in West Glenwood. 30% reduction would be 100 less units. Which, you know, might be good, might be bad. I don't know. I don't want to comment on that. But what I do know is at a 20% deed restriction, that is 20 less affordable housing units. And for a community that has, outside of the voluntary deed restrictions that go away after a couple of years, we have 0, maybe a couple that I don't know of. You know, so reducing it by 100 units means 20 less affordable housing units. You know, the comment of a diversity of housing and we have to have for sale and single family and duplexes and senior housing. Yeah, that's fantastic in an ideal world, but this isn't an ideal world. This is, you know, the reason that all these developments are getting built right now is because we're in an opportunity zone. And if we weren't in an opportunity zone, we would be getting no fire station, no affordable housing, no actual housing. No improvements on Storm King or Donegan. We wouldn't be getting any of those things. So that's why we're getting, it's a little bit perversion of the market because that's what the tail wagging the dog is a bit on these things. You know, diversity of housing is great. It's a great goal to shoot for. I have an ADU in my basement and I had a woman message me and say, hey, it's my husband. I know you said just 2 people maximum. It's my husband, myself, and my daughter. Can you please make this work? We're desperate. And I said, respectfully, I'm so sorry. I know there's a lot of desperation out there. She's like, okay, that's fine. Emailed me back like the next day. Said, okay, that's fine. It'll just be me and my daughter. And I said, well, the husband just doesn't go away. And she's like, yeah, he does. He'll figure it out. But I know my daughter and I can't live in our car anymore. So that's what we're dealing. So when we talk about wanting more townhomes, wanting more duplexes, wanting more single-family homes, the diversity of people wanting to buy, that's great in an ideal world if we're playing Sim City. I would agree. That makes a lot of sense. But this isn't Sim City. This is actual development. This is actual people living in cars in our community because there's nowhere, no inventory, period, affordable or not. I think, again, this diversity, and Tony will appreciate this history callback, but in Vietnam, the Viet Cong lived in the Chu Chi tunnels, and for years they would live just on cassava roots. They didn't have a diversity in their diet. They lived underground because we were bombing the hell out of them, and they only ate cassava because they didn't want to starve to death. And while it's great to aspire for diversity of housing, and we should encourage that with our next comp plan, like this current comp plan has, sometimes we just need cassava because we don't want to starve to death. So I am interested to have this continued, to give the developer an opportunity to come back in October. Does the developer want to address us? I'm not done talking, man. Now's appropriate.
You threw him off.
I had 10 more minutes of stuff I wanted to go on about, but go ahead.
I just want to make two comments if I could. Number one is, because of the amount of work that's been done on this project to date, as far as looking at different alternatives, we can move a lot of these things around. We've done all the engineering work, we've done all the work. So it doesn't seem as if 3 weeks you can get a lot done. Whether or not we can come to something that works for everybody, I don't know. If there is an openness to try to figure something out, we would be open to doing that. And I do think because of all of the work that's been done and all the people that are involved, I do think that actually we could at least bring this to a conclusion, at least with your professional team, within the next 2 to 3 weeks that they could present to you. So because of all the pre-work, I do think a lot could be accomplished in 3 weeks. And I think if there is a willingness to work together to figure this out, we would be open to looking at that. I think as long as there's an understanding of there needs to be a give and take, I think, as Carl had mentioned. So I guess that's the first thing. I think the second thing is, as we have said, and we've developed a fair amount of retail, we do have them all under contract. We do see this as part of a larger development with the mall. However, it is two separate pieces. So it is, at this point, I understand all the things that people are saying, and we have kind of deferred some of our development on this parcel to make sure that it would get integrated with whatever happens in the mall. I can't control what happens ultimately. Don't own it today, but I do have it under contract. Obviously, we look at this and can tell you that as part of a redevelopment of the mall and tying it into a larger residential project has a lot more chance of being successful than having a project that potentially backs up to the site plan that you guys have been showing around. So I just, and we have a very sincere interest in doing that. I think some of the comments that were made, we've been doing this for 61 years as a family. We are committed to this community. My family's been coming out here for 40 years. My parents have lived out here for 20 years. We have been listening to a lot of the different comments. I do think it's important to note this project started as a 415-unit project with no townhouses. There was asked for a lot of different diversity, and I think we've continually tried to respond, but at the end of the day, there needs to be at least a working give and take if there was that. I'd also like to just make one quick comment, because I keep hearing these numbers, and it just kind of makes me, 800 to 1,000 people living here. That's not going to happen. We manage 135,000 units. And I understand the desperation, just like you just described in your basement, where 3 people want to live there, and you're kind of saying, hey, we're only going to do 2. We are long-term players. We are long-term thinkers. This is not going to become dorm rooms. And we are not. There is no way we are going to have 800 to 1,000 people. If you look at the unit mix and you look at what we have, we would not allow that by lease. It's not what we do. And I just think it's important when you look at the overall density, and I'm not debating whether it should be 300 or 200 or whatever the number might be, open to a discussion, but I do want to make sure that we understand that this is not 800 to 1,000 people. And every time I keep hearing that out of 300 units, particularly when 110 of them are studios, it just doesn't make any sense to me. And we do manage, I appreciate the comments that are being made by people. As I said, as a company, we manage 135,000 units. So, you know, I just want to at least clarify that point as well. Thank you. Sorry to interrupt you.
Oh, that's okay.
I haven't heard from Mr. Davis yet.
Mr. Davis declines to answer.
He doesn't have to say anything, I'm just curious if he wants.
If I wanted to comment, I would.
Can I say something?
I'd like to take a vote, but go ahead.
Oh, yeah, and we can take a, well, you said Sim City or Sin City?
Sim City.
I know it.
Simulation City.
I know.
All right, the motion currently before us is a motion to continue the first meeting in October. Ryan, let's call the question.
Councilor Davis. Yes. Mayor Pro Tem Wellman. Yes. Councilor Hershey.
Yeah.
Councilor Cow.
Yes.
Councilor Stepp.
No.
Mayor Gobus.
Yes.
Councilor Russo.
Yes.
Passes 5-2.
You have to make a similar motion for the other.
Yeah, it probably wouldn't hurt since it was actually on the annexation if somebody would make a motion to continue the balance of the items.
So move to continue the balance of the items on the agenda.
I'll second that
to
as
the
well.
first meeting in October.
Ryan, let's call that question.
What date is that?
That's the 7th of October.
Councilor Cow.
Yes.
Councilor Hershey.
No.
Councilor Russo.
Yes.
Mayor Gobus.
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Wellman. Yes. Councilor Davis.
Yes.
Councilor Stepp.
No.
It passes 5-2.
Move to adjourn.
Wait.
Real quick, just for the good of the order, I just wanted to talk about real quickly masks, just on council. Okay. Is there a real quick, thank you, everybody, for showing up. I appreciate it. I know there's no public comment for everybody to participate. Hopefully democracy was not killed for you in your eyes tonight. This just takes a while to hash it out. But thank you, everybody, for your participation, both the applicant and the public. Real quick, is there any support for us going back to wearing masks in council chambers? I'm sure everybody here is vaccinated, but CDC does recommend, and most other public agencies in Garfield County are suggesting that people wear masks indoors.
No.
Does anybody have you say no?
Okay, no.
Okay. Anybody else have an opinion on
I
that?
think if people would like to wear masks, like anything, we should be allowed.
Yeah, it's personal choice.
Okay.
Before we move on, I would like to know, I will not be drawing for the 7th. I know we just moved our meeting to October 7th, so everybody should know that.
I bet we'll continue it again. I bet you'll have another crack at it. All right, motion to adjourn? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
Oh, and.